Hello and welcome to Digital Signage Explored. My name is Tim from Signage Live, and with us today we have Natalia DePalma, VP of Growth Marketing at Orbus. Natalia, thank you very much for joining.
No, thank you for having me. Very exciting.
We had the opportunity to catch up at ISE, and by chance got on the subject of digital signage, and you and I know some familiar faces in the industry. Could you give a bit of a background as to what VP of Growth Marketing is and who Orbus is?
Of course. So growth marketing is a wonderful ambiguous title in marketing, which basically allows me to be responsible for all elements of the new business, but customer success and customer business pipeline to ensure we're constantly innovating and developing the growth of the business. So my targets are completely aligned to those nice toppy ones of the growth and ARR and NRR stats, but constantly measuring performance and optimizing all the way along. Orbus, what we do is enterprise transformation software. So we are that point between the IT department and business strategy, giving you a digital blueprint of your entire enterprise to know what you're doing and where, and how do you constantly optimize it. So we work with over 625 customers globally, mainly sort of financial services or manufacturing, logistics, government sectors to help them optimize their transformation.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is where our conversation got really fascinating for me, because you're talking about this whole like strategic transformation, and digital signage is a part of that. And I had no idea that this kind of industry existed. Basically, you could basically from top to bottom deconstruct the entire company and say, this is your footprint digitally and what you can do to improve it. Is that a fair kind of assessment?
It is. I mean, basically, I also never knew it existed myself, but once I understood that its value. So if I use a McKinsey statistic, which was that 80% of transformations fail, and also CIOs, CTOs will be transforming their entire lives, right? We're in a business of constant change. And also the consumer is now demanding more of their entire experience. With macroeconomic sort of trends and factors, along with regulations, climate change, ESG regulations, these enterprises actually, regardless of the size, need to be able to see what they need to change where and when in a sustainable manner. And sustainability means, yes, okay, we've got the ESG lens, but also the cost-effective way, because they allow you to invest in other areas. There is a scary amount of disconnect when you look at IT departments and digital transformation, which is, once again, completely the right thing. And AI has kind of expedited that even further, is how do you take the business strategy and the direction the CIO and the board wants to go and marry that up with internal systems and processes at every stage. So we provide that digital blueprint to allow you to connect it. We work with retail sectors, and actually we're industry agnostic. So when you add the layer of physical tech, you've got the hardware spend which sits in the IT department, but then you start to overlap with what the marketing team or the strategic team want to do from a customer data perspective and what the insights they're getting, and how do you translate that back into a business process and dashboarding. A lot of people don't know where to begin, and that's where you get your solution architects, your enterprise architects, your business process analysts, and we basically map all of that together for you as a software.
So you're typically speaking to solutions architects or in that kind of ilk, right, in terms of what the job role is. So it's interesting because that's where the crossover you start to see that crossover, because that's typically who we're speaking to from a digital signage perspective, because it'll be a marketing department or it'll be an exec team that goes, we need to be better at communicating. We need to communicate what this business is doing better. And what we're going to do is we're going to announce or create a communication flow that everybody has a visibility to. And that's when the solutions architect comes in and goes, how do I implement this into what is probably an already very busy list of apps or softwares or whatever it is that we're actually utilizing daily.
Completely. And they're often under time pressure as well, right? They're not then given, oh yeah, we can do this in 2 years because that's the speed.
And apps are growing so well. The way businesses are using different softwares now is growing so exponentially. Obviously, there's massive SaaS companies coming out regularly that didn't exist 6 months ago that suddenly hit huge amounts of volume in terms of finances, and the CEO or the CIO goes, we've got to have this software, it's imperative. And it's just very quickly adding and spiraling.
You add the AI lens into that, right? We've got something that I'm working on at the moment, which is AI in the boardroom. We're getting these directors of top down and bottom up, right? As a marketeer, it's for me, it's just part of every day now. Of course, I would want AI in all of my software. But then you've got the top down, which is how is AI improving and how can I save money? And then you've got the IT department and the solution architects going, whoa, okay, yes, there is AI, but where does it get added and how are you measuring the value? Because that's the what is it that you want to see AI help improve it? And it all the way comes back down to the quality of the data.
Right.
What is the insights you're looking at for AI to help interpret? Because it's only as good as the information you put in. Same with machine learning. And generative AI, once again, is only as good as the prompts. So
Right.
you've got this disconnect, and then you've got this middle sector, which I call it, which is all of us running around going, well, what has AI? Well, how has it improved? And how can we make it even better again? So it's a really fascinating time.
It is, especially because there's also, I think, a layer of trust on there that needs to be implemented as well. So from a solutions architect perspective, I don't know, I'm not a solutions architect, like full disclosure, but I could imagine that there's a lot of relearning going on and probably batting away ideas that are coming up being like, hey, we should do this. And they go, absolutely no way. We're not doing this.
Yeah.
But from a strategic transformation, how does that help a solutions architect make that decision? What is it? What is their kind of key? We've got to find X, Y, and Z out of this solution.
So I think it comes down to we're actually doing a bit around sort of data governance. So it comes down to actually having the right people assessing what is it that we're trying to do, what is either the hardware or software that's going to help implement that, and then what are the outcomes to enhance ultimately the ARR, NRR, or your ESG and bottom line. Ultimately, that's where it's come from. And so, the way that I view the world, it's very much it has to come from a central source of truth across departments. You cannot operate in silos, and that's what we do see. Right, one of the things that I've been witness to in my role at the moment is we've already touched on it, application rationalisation. I'm more culpable than a lot of people. I love buying tech. I thoroughly enjoy it because it's constantly changing and it does enhance. But then there's a lot of applications that duplicate features. So the application rationalisation is one piece, but the other part is around how do you actually get the insights that you need on a day-to-day basis, and rather than just having a mass amount of data and then you go, so what?
Yeah.
Right.
You mentioned there's two major points. Is that a duplication? And we've had it before where you buy two softwares that do something similar, but one is missing one portion of the other, but they both have a lot of crossover. And you're like, what's the value here that we're returning? And is there a cost saving exercise here?
Yes.
And the other one is being able to actually utilize all of the product that you're using. Because I think there's definitely a lot of like kind of architecture that ends up being left alone and not utilized. And there's reports that turn up on a weekly basis that nobody opens and all that kind of stuff.
Completely. And it's so fascinating. And then it's so easy to get down in a rabbit hole as well when you're in an enterprise with a lot of the people that we work with. It's not just one department, right? You've then got multiple departments across multiple geographical regions that can also be overlap and disconnect. And when personally, I've brought a lot of tech over my career, and the fun part is like, I say to them, like, honestly, your stuff does pretty much the same as your competitors.
Right.
What's different is who am I buying it from? And suddenly I get all people centric, right? Because it's about relationships.
Totally.
But the second thing is, what's the enablement? I'm like, it looks good. I agree with you. It's a pretty sexy piece of tech. And that is language I tell these salespeople, FYI. But it's basically, what are you going to do to support me to enable my users to use this effectively so I can get the outputs that I need? And not to make this self-fulfilling, go back to Orbus, but that's what we do with how we map out that blueprint. What is this software trying to do? How does it support a business process of who needs to use it? And then how does it integrate with the IT department for user? And then you've got the regulatory pressures, the investment committee and so forth. There's so many different facets these days to purchasing anything or deciding, to bring back to your digital screens, I want to digitize my menu boards.
Right.
I agree. That's what everyone else is doing. But why? What is it you want to achieve from doing that? And the marketeers can have these great ideas, but it has to link back into what the enterprise wants to receive and how you optimize that information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really interesting because I think there's two tangents to this, because there's that piece of we want to be able to use digital signage because it's of more benefit to, to our communications, but also all of this data that we're talking about, all of that stored away data where we go, actually, are we utilizing this data in the way that we want to? That's where the digital signage screens really come into their own, because you can just export that data and have it appear on, pull your Power BI reports, pull your SharePoint reports and put them on your screen. So not only the decision makers and the key kind of executive team can see what's going on, but, the middle management and those that are responsible for delivering, let's say it's a manufacturing plant and they've got to hit target, having those updated pieces of those data pieces updated regularly adds more value to the software that you're then utilizing to capture that data. So it's a bit of a kind of a snake eating its own tail scenario where they both add to each other.
Completely. I mean, in previous roles and worlds that I've sort of worked in, it's really fascinating when you go, okay, you're showing something on a digital screen, right? And you've got that live data and information about what's being seen, how many people are standing there looking at it, you have eyeballs, the position and placement of that, the supplementary. Then you go down into the transactional data, what's being purchased at that moment, how is that being influenced in terms of actual live transactions and money into the system. And then what do you do? That's great. There's something you can see correlations, but to my point, it's always, so what?
Yeah.
What do we then do with that information? And sometimes there can be such a lag all the way through. And then by the time you go, oh, let's try updating this, the world's moved on again. Your competitors have already done something else.
Yeah, speed of
So
implementation, I guess, is a part of it as well, right? Because if you're going to take you 6 months or a year to implement something, you go, by the time we get there, is it going to have changed?
yeah, completely. And, consumers move terribly fast. So the digital screens have to be agile. And I think there's something that I'm guilty of. You think something that's physical is just longer to change,
Yeah.
which is not, because the physical digital signage is actually, you're not selling the screens anymore. You're selling the insight, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, oh, totally.
You're selling, you're selling very good animation and visuals, which can really be immersive even without the latest goggle things, which are super cool, by the way. And I think that's really fascinating. But you're selling the visual aspect of elevating a look and feel and an experience, but you're selling, how long are they looking at something for? How does that relate to foot traffic? What's being engaging? How can you optimize it? And that's where the creative links to the data, links to the insights, and then the commercial team.
And we should touch on the fact that obviously you do have a history in the kind of digital signage world as well as this side. So this is kind of coming from that perspective. What were you doing when you were kind of closer to digital signage?
Sure. Part of my career was in travel retail, so working in airports and train stations. And let me tell you, people behave completely differently from the high street once they're in an airport or train station environment. Don't know what it is. I think there's a psychology behind being in what is like no man's land. You've got your passport, there's complete fear, you don't want to miss anything. So signage had become, or digital signage, and I don't want to show my age here, but it was only just starting to be ramped up across the retail and food travel sector. But it was really interesting how to implement different signage at different stages of the customer journey. So be the wayfinding from how do you integrate with the airport's digital wayfinding signage and messaging all the way through to the point of sale point, all the way all through to the FPOS machines, the payment terminals. You've suddenly got a multi-touch point of digital screens, and the communication journey across all of that has to be seamless, because otherwise the consumer goes, oh yeah, that's, it's eyesight redundancy. And it's such powerful.
You don't have time
points
to educate them either. It has to be a unified experience that everyone can understand without any kind of manual.
And you imagine going back to you're building these retail outlets and going, actually, I want to spend X amount of money on ensuring that the digital screen communication plan matches. And they go, well, where are you going to get that investment from? So suddenly we get back into the data part, which is, I need to show the insights that I'm going to get and the optimization to drive growth back through to the sort of CapEx spend that's needed to install the screens and to invest in the signage and to continually optimize it. Because as we've said, this is live. It's a living, breathing thing. It's when people say, a website, it's static. It's not. The digital screens have to continue to evolve, and you have to have a roadmap for it.
Yeah, that's a challenge that we're trying, or the industry is trying to address now, because there's two pieces to it. There's the piece where you go, I need an individual that looks after this, but I don't want to hire a team of 20 people, because then the cost return isn't proving its value. So a lot of AI, as you mentioned, interestingly enough, we actually just demonstrated at ISE a product which we have built in theory, which is just kind of to take to the market, which was, and I find this really exciting. It's basically takes a SharePoint newsfeed. Let's say you've got a SharePoint newsfeed that goes across global different infrastructures. It condenses it via ChatGPT into a script in 7 or 8 languages. And then it gets sent to Synthesia, which is a company that has those like kind of avatar humans. And then it makes like a newsfeed. So it makes 7 newsfeeds in 7 languages and just distributes them to the players based on what language they're in. So it's all of this kind of, how do we automate some of the bits which are cost prohibitive as a company? No company, very few companies go and buy a studio and hire a broadcaster and all this kind of stuff. It's never going to be as cost effective as doing something like this.
No, completely. And actually, whilst I'm thinking about it, I think what I'm fascinated is we do a lot for the end consumer, but what about your employees? We work in an office currently where we've got lots of digital screens, and actually they're turned off most of the time because people don't know how to put content on them that's relevant. So I think there's an entire architecture and a use case to develop internal communications with the right usage of digital screeners and communication.
Well, you have to introduce me to someone over there and we can talk about Signage Live and we can get that figured out, no problem at all.
Okay, done.
No, but absolutely. And I think that is something we see a lot, is people go, we did the implementation, or someone did the implementation 5 years ago, and the screens have sat there and they're a waste of resource that aren't being used. How can we uplift them? And it's not a big ask if you're looking at just pulling in automated things. So it's more a question of what value do you want to pull out of the screens? What information are you trying to dissect and send? And then how do you do that in a way that's as cost effective as possible? In fact, you mentioned the headsets, the VR headsets. I think it's the Apple. What's the Apple one called?
I did the sexy Apple goggles. Yeah, is what I've been referring to as.
I did a VR video with the Oculus headset where what we actually had was a license of Signage Live running virtually on a wall next to a physical digital signage, but they were pulling from the same data source. So I think there's a lot of theory later on about AR and how we're going to have advertising based on AR, based on like a paywall. You could walk through a specific luxurious place, but if you haven't paid, you have ads that return up on your end. There's a whole new episode on AR and the future of digital signage that I think's diverted slightly from the subject there.
No worries.
One of my other questions was around data lakes, and I know it's a language we're hearing more and more in the digital signage sector, and I'm assuming that's something that maybe from an Orbus perspective you end up discussing quite a lot. Can you kind of shed some light on pulling data from that and what solutions architects are trying to do?
I think it all goes back to what I started with by saying, what is it you're trying to measure? What is the outcomes, right? And that has to be, there is nothing worse across a business than different departments requiring different information at different times. And then you go back to, architecting what it is the outputs are, and it just becomes a mess. Because we are in a data-rich world, we have to be able to pull the right information at the right time. And I always start with the dashboards and the KPIs.
Yeah.
What is it we're trying to measure? And where are we getting that information from? And how does it feed into those different points? That ultimately, it's the chicken and the egg. Do you take the innovation and the creative and see if it works? Or do you take the insights and go, how does that determine the innovation and the creative?
Right.
What we know is that different departments want different information in different ways. I'm a classic marketeer. I like pretty things. I obviously like graphs that go trend upwards, but if they're going down, I want to be able to react quickly. That is a very different view than the CXO boards that want different dashboards, to the sales teams, to the IT teams. What we're able to do is aggregate that data for you. And as we add more AI, it becomes a lot more automated. So you basically say, can you tell me what application is being underused or something? And then we'll be able to surface, go, right, this one is currently used across X number of users globally. It is a hot use here, it's up for renewal here, but it's currently not delivering its X requirement that you put into it that this solution needs to do. From a business process perspective, obviously the solution architects work closely with the EAs and then the IT department. It is making sure that that original vision, that solution, that business strategy is also talking all the way through.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to make the wrong decisions. We talk about making smarter decisions faster, but you can only do that if your business is mapped.
Yeah.
If all of those different departments are talking. Exactly. Yeah. Right? What is that output? And it's okay if what you thought would happen from your KPIs isn't what comes in, but you need to be able to adjust that. I wouldn't be me if I didn't mention this next point, which is around sustainability and ESG.
Yeah, great.
And fundamentally, everything we've just talked about now has to have, or should have, an ESG lens on every decision that's being made. So it's a term that's been around, well, actually, I shouldn't have started with that. I don't know how long it's been around, but it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So it's that link between CSR being that corporate social responsibility, governance side, which very much links to, regulatory, keeping people out of jail, right? And making sure that data accuracy and alignment, all of those compliance testings that you get, that kind of sits in that governance column. And then environmental. So how are we achieving our net zero targets? How are we measuring our greenhouse gases and our emissions and that science-based targeting? So it links all of those three together. So when people talk about sustainability, they often interchange with meaning ESG, or they can just mean the environmental side. So what are we doing to ensure that there is a planet for tomorrow, and how are we being 1% better and making positive impact? But I use, and ESG is that broader and that link between the three. And what we do at Orbus, and what I'm fiercely passionate about, is ensuring that you have an ESG lens on all decision making.
Right.
Because I think, as I mentioned, that it can no longer, and I think you're going to touch on it with me in a second, data
Mm.
silos. This is a
Right.
fantastic one to say that there is one department or one mandate, be it the CSR side or the government side,
Yeah.
but that gets done over here. And then the visibility on the solution architects, enterprise architects, IT departments don't see that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
suddenly being 1% better or making your net zero targets becomes more or less redundant because
Yeah.
people are just converging in different directions with it.
That's interesting because I actually just did some research and found an article from the Digital Signage Federation, which I'll link on this show, because there's a lot of conversation in digital signage around being better at reducing consumption.
Mhm.
And I think there's a big divide between, is digital signage more cost effective than having a physical print media? But
Mhm.
after doing some research, they were like, consumption reduction is down by like 60% because you forget things like, if you have 200 locations and you need to go and update something, there's got to be a truck that rolls out to
Yeah.
distribute new content. You've got to have individual people that,
Yeah.
employed to go and replace that. So when you look at the full data, it's really interesting to see how the upfront cost for a screen over its lifespan, and I think it's increasing that lifespan, which is the most effective thing at reducing
Yeah.
the carbon, is if you have a screen that can last 7 years, then that's much better than a screen that can last 4 years or 3 years or whatever along those lines.
But then we going into the granularity, which I find fascinating, is how do you make those decisions at the point
Mm,
of purchasing?
right.
Okay.
Hmm.
And what we've launched is an ESG lens, which allows you at that point of decision making, just validating some questions. What
Hmm.
is that life of that screen? And it might be just because it's a longer life, actually might not make it the most sustainable purchase
Right.
because
Okay.
it's maybe the manufacturing that's used or the product or the ongoing lifetime costs of it. Yes, it lasts 7 years, but then to replace it because it's not a common one and there's supply chain issues, right? So suddenly the decision making in just a single purchase can
Yeah.
impact being 1% better or making positive impact. But what I'm trying to get, what I'm on a mission to do, is to help enterprises just ask the right questions at the right time so that
Mm.
you can have visibility to make better decisions and to
That's
make more sustainable decisions.
That's really fascinating. I never even considered that. The fact that, I mean, we kind of scratch the surface on these subjects because we're a software piece of the
Mm,
arm, but to then talk about, well, actually, duration, it's the carbon cost to build and maintain the thing over a period of time versus the period of time that you can use it for.
yeah.
It's interesting. We did mention there was one other piece I did want to ask you about,
Mm,
which was that siloed experience, because you have this insight into lots of different businesses and how they work in unison when you've got, your IT departments, marketing, whatever
yeah.
that ends up being. And a lot of those decisions seem to be being made in a very siloed way. And we feel that experience because we'll have some major companies that are using us as a product in their APAC offices, but
Yeah.
something totally different or nothing in
Yeah.
their UK offices.
Yeah.
How do you kind of broach that with companies when it looks at how can we improve that?
Um, I think it's cultural, right?
Interesting.
And then that's possibly a bit left field. You Communication and project management and alignment is fundamental, if I use the word again, to be a sustainable business.
Mm.
What you just described is very unsustainable.
Hmm.
Um, and the fact that has even happened, okay, it's happened, but how do you bring the alignment back? One
Right.
of the things we say is data silos or just working in silos, whether you say the data is just the method of communication,
Mm.
is more common than we would ever want to admit to.
Right.
Even at a micro level of even in a marketing department, I see it and I'm like, no, 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 bring it back, bring it back. But then how do you
Hmm.
do it? And then spare out. So I think project management tools, I'm a huge fan of Asana. Some might say I'm a big aficionado of them.
Hmm.
But they really help you map out and cross collaborate on the parts that matter so you can have
Mm.
that visibility. Now, I don't have experience of running multinational organizations and enterprises, etc. But if you've got that going on across departments, across regions,
Yeah.
it's dangerous.
Hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, you're just seeing money disappear. You
Yeah.
want to be able to consolidate, and that's where we come in with that digital blueprint, right? And it's not
Mm.
going to happen overnight. Financial services industries are working on such legacy tech and business processes, and then you've got the
Yeah.
regulatory pressure. Then you've got climate impact, which you could just cut out communication channels, and people can't do applications. The decision makers go, okay, I'm dealing with crisis after crisis. you need to have transformation teams that are coming in to give you that blueprint to go, right, these are all the things that are working in silos. We can't ultimately, and I think this is capability modeling. Somebody used a really nice analogy of me. If you're a sports person, yes, you want to be fitter, but if you're a runner, you're going to focus on your legs. The capability of strengthening that versus your arms. As an enterprise, that capability mapping and that digital blueprint is, I know I need to be fitter and I need to be smarter and I need to be more sustainable. But which part am I actually going to focus on that's helping to deliver those end results without working in silo? And you can't just maintain the fitness of your legs by just eating better, right? You've got to have the exercises for it, and you've got to know what to do. So I know that's quite a holistic concept to talk about the data silos, but it's about focusing in on everything that contributes to the part that is going to make the difference at that moment to hit those goals, but also knowing you can't just have fit legs. You can't then just forget about the top of the body.
This is the title of the show, by the way. That's the title of this episode.
Brilliant.
I think that's really, because that then ties in really nicely, just to kind of put a bow on all of this from a digital signage perspective, is if you're trying to unify the communications, there is a tool. And a saying that I like to use is digital signage is learning by osmosis, where you are not opening an email, you are not looking at a Slack notification, you're not looking at an internal file, you are just living and breathing around these screens. I know that you can see from behind me, there is a screen that just continuously sits there and drip feeds that information. And it's a case of what's the core, what's the leg exercise that we're going to do? We need to make sure that everybody in the company is on the same page and they understand that this is key and vital. So I really like that's a great kind of wrap up to the show. And thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
On LinkedIn.
Okay.
I know that's really old school and very corporate of me.
Thank you very much again for coming on the show, Natalia. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have you on again and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.